On October 24, 1980, Paul Benowitz reported what he had found to officials at Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque, New Mexico. When he first noticed colored lights in the sky, he assumed they were secret military aircraft. That explanation made sense, at least at the beginning. But things changed when he began intercepting strange radio signals that didn't sound human. They appeared structured, almost like a language.
Ground, ground. Women of Earth are needed. Flexible, the next discharges. Our ship. Oh, women, do not command the North among us. You have many friends. Water very short. Resist all attempts at alteration. Listen, Orange. Make peace. Victory. Our bases obtain supplies from the Starship metal. Time is yanked. Time is yanked. Message hit star. Using rejuvenation methods got us in trouble. Six Sky we realized tell you all might help you. Take fast portion universe against our aggression. The number of our crashed saucers is 8. Nerve you we realized tell the truth. Jump. Jump opposite. Alien forces me no help to you. Metal we come invisible. Keeping change we will not join sides with anyone. But our race is dying on the home planet.
Paul brought what he found to the Air Force. In public, officials dismissed the idea of aliens. Behind closed doors, they did the opposite. They backed his claims, supported his work, and even paid for his research. Paul spent years collecting data and handing it over to the government. Not long after, he was committed to a mental hospital. So what went wrong?
But the Air Force has said time and time again, and this is a quote from Richard Horner, Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Research and Development. All but a small percentage of these reports of unidentified flying objects have been definitely attributed to natural phenomena that are neither mysterious nor dire, end quote. What about that?
I'll answer that, but I'd like to make several points doing it. In 1947, the Air Technical Intelligence Center at Dayton, the top Air Force intelligence men and scientists under contract, sent a secret document to the Commanding General of the Air Force saying that whatever these things were, they were real. In 1948, ATIC, the same group, sent a top secret estimate to the Commanding General. Hoyt Vandenberg said these were interplanetary spaceships. In 1952, there was an intelligence analysis of the maneuvers of these things, as seen by radar, triangulation, radar photographs, and in 53, the Central Intelligence Agency and the Air Force had a special panel of scientists meet at the Pentagon to tell them what to do. And after they got through, this group said, you don't have proof that these things exist, not scientific proof, but you have a very strong circumstantial case. We suggest you quadruple the investigation, set up special observation posts, in the meantime, release everything you've got to the American people. And they have been spending a lot of money investigating flying saucers. If they don't exist, why the money? Why did the intelligence teams rush out every time there's a sighting?
In 1969, Paul Benowitz was working on his PhD in physics when he founded an electronics company in New Mexico called Thunder Scientific. The business took off quickly. His main customers were the Air Force and NASA. He worked so closely with the military that he bought a house and built a private lab right next to Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque. Kirtland wasn't just any base. It was one of the largest Air Force facilities in the United States. It housed research labs, weapons testing sites, observatories, and massive storage areas for nuclear weapons. From the upper deck of his home, Paul regularly noticed unusual lights moving across the sky near the base. They were brightly colored and traveled far too fast to be normal aircraft. He recorded and filmed everything he saw, carefully logging each sighting. Eventually, Paul decided to investigate further. With his background in physics, engineering, and electronics, he set up advanced radio equipment and began scanning frequencies. What he found stood out immediately. The signals were in the gigahertz range, far above what the military was using at the time. As both a pilot and a defense contractor, Paul was familiar with Air Force communications. These signals were nothing like that. After studying them closely, he realized they were data bursts. And inside those bursts were messages. The transmissions followed clear patterns. Paul couldn't decode them by hand, but he did have access to an early home computer. He wrote his own software and operating system, then fed the signals into the machine to analyze them. At first, the output was meaningless, so Paul used a classic code-breaking method: context. He programmed the system to assume the messages would include basic concepts such as ship, base, air, water, and time. That assumption changed everything. You don't learn an alien language the way you learn French or Spanish. Instead, you let the computer match patterns to situations. Think of it like this. If you know a message is about making coffee, you tell the computer to search for repeating patterns connected to beans, water, sugar, or milk. Once those patterns are clear, the program can identify less common actions like grinding, brewing, or drinking. Over time, a working structure forms. You may not know the exact words, but you understand what they represent. Paul's early translations were rough and confusing. Still, he continued refining the process. Eventually, the messages started to make sense. The translations weren't perfect, but they were clear enough for Paul to believe he understood what the beings were saying and why they were here. Then Paul made a risky move. Using the language he had decoded, he transmitted a message back on the same frequency. Not long after, he received a response. This was the first message he translated. Round ground women of Earth are needed flexible. The next discharges our ship. Our women do not command the north among us. You have many friends. Water very short. Resist all attempts of adoration. Listen orange. Make peace. It sounded calm, but unsettling. The phrase about women of Earth raised immediate concern. Another message followed. Victory. Our bases obtain supplies from the starship. Metal time is yanked. Time is yanked. Message hit star. Using rejuvenation methods got us in trouble. Six sky, we realized. Tell you all might help you all. There were many transmissions like this. One message stood out. Take fast portion universe against our aggression. The number of our crash saucers is 8. Wherever we realize, tell the truth. Jump opposite alien forces. Me no help to you. That'll become invisible. Keeping change. We will not join sides with anyone, but our race is dying on the home planet. At this point, Paul believed he had achieved two-way contact with an alien group. He suspected they were not here with good intentions. He continued communicating with them, trying to understand their goals and look for weaknesses. After many exchanges, Paul came to a conclusion. Their plans were dangerous. According to what he decoded, the aliens' home planet was dying. Multiple alien groups were already on Earth. Some matched the familiar image of gray beings with large eyes. Others looked almost human, Homo sapiens, but more refined in appearance. By now, Paul was convinced an invasion was coming. He believed the public needed to know. He compiled his research, recordings, and translations into a detailed report and went directly to the Air Force. As a veteran and trusted contractor, he was taken seriously. He was granted a meeting and pushed hard for immediate action, insisting Americans needed time to prepare and defend themselves. The military did not dismiss him. The base commander involved the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, known as OSI, to review Paul's work. They were impressed by what they saw. Agent Richard Doty was assigned to the case. He visited Paul's home, examined the recordings, reviewed the radio equipment, and studied the entire setup Paul used to document and communicate with the beings. The Air Force agreed to support Paul financially, on the condition that all findings were sent directly to them. Paul accepted. With backing from the Air Force and guidance from Agent Doty, Paul worked non-stop. He believed he could gather enough information to stop the aliens and protect humanity. Around the same time, in the late 1970s and early 1980s, Bill Moore was gaining attention in UFO circles. In 1980, he published a book titled The Roswell Incident. Before that, the Roswell crash wasn't widely discussed or taken seriously. Moore's book changed that. Much of what the public knows about Roswell today traces back to his work. When Moore reached out to Paul Bennewitz and asked to meet, Paul agreed immediately. The two developed a friendship and met every few months over the next year. During that time, Paul expressed frustration. He was sending massive amounts of data to the Air Force each week, but nothing seemed to be happening. Then, in 1981, Bill Moore handed Paul a classified government document called Project Aquarius. The file was dated a year earlier, and it changed everything. When Paul read the document, he was stunned. The 7,602nd Air Force Intelligence Group had been collecting and reviewing all of his information without ever telling him. On one hand, it confirmed that the Air Force was taking him seriously. On the other, it raised a disturbing question. If this work mattered so much, why had they lied to him? Bill Moore chose his words carefully when he spoke next. In a low voice, he told Paul, "You need to be very careful with this. Use it only for your personal research, and don't do anything else with it." The final paragraph of the Aquarius document read as follows: "The official U.S. government policy and findings of Project Aquarius remain classified at the highest level, with no release outside authorized intelligence channels and limited access to MJ-12. The Bennewitz case is currently being monitored by NASA INENS, which requests that all future evidence be submitted through AFOSIIVOD due to the risk of public exposure." Neither Bill Moore nor Paul Bennewitz had any idea what this meant. It was the first time the name Majestic 12 had ever appeared in any document they had seen. Majestic 12 was described as a secret group of 12 individuals who controlled all information related to UFOs. Every report, every investigation, and even minor mentions were supposedly routed through them. Only this group could decide what action would be taken. Paul, who was a pilot, began flying over the area where he believed an underground base existed. The location was Archuleta Mesa, near Dulce, New Mexico. From the air, he photographed strange domes, ventilation shafts that seemed to lead underground, and large tower-like structures. He added all of these images to his growing collection of reports. This went on for years. Then something changed. While tracking what he believed were alien transmissions, Paul became convinced that the aliens and the U.S. government had some type of agreement, and that it had fallen apart. On his next flight over the area, he noticed signs of destruction. There were burned sections of land, trees pushed flat, and even aircraft wreckage. To him, it looked like a battle had taken place over Dulce. If the United States was going to survive a conflict like that, Paul believed it would need new technology and a clear plan. In his mind, he already had both. Using the large amount of data he had intercepted from the transmissions, Paul created a report he called Project Beta. Project Beta outlined an alleged alien invasion plan, methods to stop it, and a weapon that could be used against them. Paul even claimed he had built a working version of this energy-based weapon. According to Project Beta, the aliens had abducted at least 300,000 Americans. These people were supposedly implanted with devices and then released back into everyday life. Paul believed these implants turned humans into living surveillance tools, acting as cameras and microphones. He claimed they could be used to alter memories, take control of thoughts, or shut down the brain completely. He also believed that experiments were happening beneath Dulce, including genetic testing that involved combining alien DNA with humans. Paul sent Project Beta to senators, other government officials, and even the President of the United States. The only response he received was a generic letter stating that Project Blue Book had ended and that the Air Force no longer investigated UFOs. Paul knew that statement was false. The Aquarius document proved it. The only explanation that made sense to him was that the government itself had been compromised. He began to believe that high-ranking military leaders, politicians, and even the president could have been implanted. Over time, Paul became increasingly frustrated and fearful. His behavior started to change. When Bill, Moore, and Richard Doty visited him to check on his mental condition, it was clear things had gotten worse. Paul kept knives and firearms throughout his home. He said he was being followed and watched constantly. He lost a dangerous amount of weight and was smoking nearly a pack of cigarettes every hour. He claimed aliens were entering his home at night, injecting him with unknown substances and forcing him to drive into the desert. He said he would return home later with no memory of what happened. Both Moore and Doty later said they noticed needle marks on his arms. By this point, everyone around Paul was urging him to stop. Bill Moore, Richard Doty, and his friends all told him to walk away from the research. His family begged him to destroy the equipment and focus on his business instead. Paul refused. He believed the work was too important to abandon. His mental state continued to deteriorate. He trusted no one. He became convinced his wife had been implanted. His children were forced to take over the business. At his lowest point, Paul barricaded himself inside his house and packed sandbags against every door and window. His family eventually intervened. After several hospital stays, Paul was committed to a psychiatric facility. Paul Benowitz died in 2003 at the age of 75. He spent the final 25 years of his life fearful, consumed by his beliefs, and mentally broken because no one would accept what he thought he had uncovered, even though he believed the evidence was overwhelming. What makes the story even more tragic is that none of it had to happen. The aliens, the underground base, the transmissions, the experiments, the abductions, and the supposed plan to take over the world were all false. Every part of it was a fabricated story, fed to Paul by Richard Doty and the U.S. government. The Air Force Office of Special Investigations, known as OSI, has several responsibilities. One of them is counterintelligence. A common counterintelligence method is spreading false information. When Paul first intercepted signals coming from Kirtland Air Force Base, he didn't immediately think they were alien. His real concern was that if he could intercept them, then foreign intelligence agencies, especially the Soviets, could do the same. After reviewing Paul's equipment and findings, the Air Force realized he was right. The signals were coming from the base and were not secure. When they examined his photographs and video footage, the objects he believed were UFOs were actually classified experimental aircraft. Instead of telling Paul the truth, which the Air Force believed could expose sensitive programs, Special Agent Richard Doty was assigned a different task. His job was to feed Paul information that would lead him to believe he had uncovered a hostile alien threat. Why not simply tell Paul to stop? Because the Air Force didn't know who Paul might share information with. If Paul had already been compromised by Soviet intelligence, then revealing secret projects would have been dangerous. So the Air Force chose deception. At first, Doty's hints were subtle and vague. Nothing too specific. But over time, the false information became more detailed, and eventually other government agencies became involved as well. At one point, Paul became convinced that someone was watching him from the empty house across the street. It was easy for others to dismiss this as paranoia, and not take him seriously. But Paul wasn't imagining it. The National Security Agency was actually monitoring him from that very house. What made the situation even darker was that the strange alien signals Paul believed he was decoding were not alien at all. They were sent by the NSA. The agency even replaced Paul's computer so they could control how he interpreted the messages. None of it was real, yet Paul believed every bit of it, and the consequences for him were devastating. Paul Benowitz was caught in a government counterintelligence operation, but he was far from the only target. Around the time when author Bill Moore had become well known in the UFO world, someone from government intelligence reached out to him. That person was later identified as Richard Doty. Doty proposed a deal. Moore would be given access to classified-looking UFO documents and insider knowledge about what the government was supposedly hiding. In return, Moore would help spread Doty's fabricated UFO stories and quietly keep tabs on people inside the UFO community. Doty wanted names, connections, and information. The concern was simple. If Paul Benowitz had managed to intercept sensitive military signals, others might be able to do the same. While it has never been officially confirmed, many believe that during this period, the United States was developing and testing stealth or drone technology at Kirtland Air Force Base. That kind of information could not be allowed to reach foreign adversaries. This is how Bill, Moore, and Paul Benowitz crossed paths. It wasn't by chance. Moore was handed the so-called Project Aquarius document and instructed to pass it along to Paul. This is where the operation began to fall apart. Moore had already seen the Aquarius document earlier. He found it fascinating and, at the time, believed the material he was receiving was genuine. But when he was later told to give the document to Paul, he noticed changes. Certain details didn't match what he had seen before. Doty dismissed Moore's concerns, claiming the document had been cleaned up and edited for security reasons. Moore didn't buy that explanation. It was clear that the goal was to push Paul into going public with the Aquarius document. Once that happened, the government could step in and destroy his credibility. Moore now found himself being asked to deceive another UFO researcher on behalf of the U.S. government. Paul wasn't just a colleague. He was someone Moore considered a friend. Going along with the plan meant helping ruin that friend's reputation. Moore struggled with the decision and did nothing for months. Eventually, Doty gave him an ultimatum: either deliver the document or never hear from him again. Moore complied and handed Paul the fake Project Aquarius material. At the same time, he warned Paul to keep it private and never talk about it publicly. While Doty had control over what Paul was seeing around Kirtland Air Force Base, there was still another problem. Paul was convinced he had discovered underground bases near Dulce. To deal with that, Doty and the Office of Special Investigations staged the area. They placed domes, vents, and objects that looked like alien craft throughout the landscape. The mountains were filled with these props. Black-painted helicopters were flown through the area at specific times so Paul would spot them. And he did. Paul believed everything he saw. When you think about the time, money, and effort spent misleading one man, it raises an obvious question. Who approved this, and what was the real reason? It wasn't just about silencing a single UFO researcher. Richard Doty's larger mission was to penetrate the UFO community and overwhelm it with false information. By doing that, the government could watch how people reacted, identify potential security threats, and step in if needed. Eventually, the entire operation began to unravel. Every year, the Mutual UFO Network, known as MUFON, hosts a convention. In 1989, Bill Moore took the stage as a speaker. During his presentation, he admitted that the U.S. government had been spreading false UFO stories for years, and he confessed that he had helped make it happen. The crowd reacted harshly. He was nearly shouted off the stage. For many in the audience, it was devastating to hear that the beliefs they had built their lives around were based on lies. That moment ended Bill Moore's career in UFO research. He later revealed that he wasn't alone. Several well-known figures in the UFO world had also made similar arrangements with Doty, though Moore never named them. He also said that Doty fed false stories to tabloids like the National Enquirer and to journalists such as Linda Moulton Howe. The disinformation effort created by the Air Force OSY and carried out by Richard Doty worked exactly as planned. UFO stories became so extreme and contradictory that serious research had no chance of being taken seriously. Another goal was to push believers to the margins. Scientists, politicians, and journalists were discouraged from speaking openly about UFOs. The subject had become associated with outlandish claims, leaving only fringe voices willing to discuss it. That outcome suited the government perfectly. But here's the problem. For false information to work well, it has to stay close to reality. That raises an uncomfortable question. Out of everything Doty put out there, how much was actually true? According to Doty himself, most of it. Richard Doty's story is difficult to untangle. Because of his background in military intelligence, reliable records are hard to come by. After the Paul Bennewitz incident, he remained in the Air Force but left the Office of Special Investigations. Doty later said that some of his superiors believed he went too far, and he was asked to step away. He claims he left by choice. There's nothing in his service record that clearly contradicts his account. After leaving the military in 1988, his path becomes unclear. He joined the New Mexico State Police and later retired. Somewhere along the way, his views shifted. He began identifying himself as a UFO believer. Today, Doty still appears in interviews and documentaries and continues to attend UFO conventions. In the early 1980s, few people caused more damage to serious UFO research than Richard Doty. Yet decades later, he is still invited as a speaker at these events. He claims that around 80% of UFO information is real. He insists the Roswell crash happened. He says the U.S. government recovered a spacecraft, recovered alien bodies, and even kept a living alien at Los Alamos for several years. Doty has said that when he was briefed into OSI, he was shown film footage from the late 1940s and early 1950s proving these events occurred. But that leads to the biggest question of all. Can he be trusted? If you track Doty's interviews over the years, the details often change. That could be age, or it could be something else. Then there's his career path. He worked for the Air Force spreading false UFO stories, then became a police officer. He speaks openly about many things, yet rarely mentions that he spent 10 years working as a contractor for Hal Puthoff. For those unfamiliar, Puthoff is the founder of To the Stars, a private organization focused on UFO research. And who else is involved with To the Stars? Christopher Mellon, a member of the Mellon family, who has also worked for the CIA and the Department of Defense. Another key figure is Steve Justice, former head of Advanced Systems Development at Lockheed Martin's Skunk Works division. He has been connected to many classified military programs, yet finding clear information about him is almost impossible. Then there's Luis Elizondo, a former intelligence officer who led the secret Pentagon effort known as AATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. AATIP was basically the next phase of Project Blue Book, the military's earlier effort to study UFO reports. For years, the government claimed AATIP didn't even exist. That changed only after the New York Times revealed it. What's interesting is that the private group claiming it will bring UFOs into public discussion is filled with high-ranking figures from the U.S. intelligence world. They even bring in people like Richard Doty, individuals who once worked directly inside that system. So the question is simple. Did all these people suddenly change? They spent their careers running secret operations against American citizens and feeding false information to people who only wanted answers. Now they say that was the past, and that this time they can be trusted. Yes, the New York Times exposed hidden government programs tied to UFOs. Yes, the Navy released videos showing pilots tracking unidentified objects. Yes, the government dumped a massive batch of UFO-related documents into the public record. Congress even held open hearings on the topic. But after all that, what do we really know? Very little. Was Richard Doty lying back then? Is he lying now? There's no clear way to tell. After decades of government-backed misinformation, a campaign that many believe never stopped, it's almost impossible to separate truth from fiction. And that confusion was never an accident. That was always the goal. The government owns huge stretches of empty land, yet it chose to test secret aircraft right near Paul Benowitz's home in Albuquerque. Paul didn't start receiving strange signals until after Agent Doty inspected and photographed his equipment. Then, suddenly, the NSA appeared and began sending what Paul believed were alien transmissions directly into his house. These events didn't just happen by chance. The Air Force laid out bait that was impossible to ignore, and Paul Benowitz, Bill Moore, and many others took it. They were victims. And in a way, so are we all. Victims of our own government, our military, our police agencies, and our elected leaders. Every one of them takes an oath to defend the Constitution and protect the country from enemies, both foreign and domestic. But who does that promise really protect? It doesn't seem to protect the individual citizen. It doesn't matter how honest you are, how loyal, how devoted to your country, or how many years you spent serving it. If you get in the way of the government's plans, even slightly, it will pour massive effort into tearing you down. Your name, your money, your work, and even your mental health can be destroyed, and it will be labeled a job well done. Your government is willing to strip away everything you care about in the name of national security. How many people have paid that price? How many lives have been damaged or lost under that excuse? And maybe the most unsettling question of all is this. If you start demanding real answers, who becomes the next target? Because history suggests it could be you.